in about 2/3 of the world, Christians of one stripe or another face some sort of harassment.
It can result in imprisonment, torture, and even martyrdom for the cause of Jesus Christ.
The level of brutality is almost unbelievable.
Christians in innumerable countries are under huge amounts of pressure, either from the government or from the societies in which they find themselves.
They number some 2.2 billion people, and harassment can range from loss of life to loss of livelihood.
Christians have become an endangered species in some countries of the world.
Thank you so much for joining us for today's The Persecuted Church. It's always good to have your company, and we appreciate you taking the time to hear about what's happening to brothers and sisters in Christ in different parts of the world. And as always, I'm delighted to have with me in the studio here Andrew Boyd. Andrew, welcome to the program.
As always, I'm delighted to be here, Gordon. Thank you.
It's good to have you. And Andrew, last month, and in fact the last few months, we've been saying to viewers, we'd love to hear from you. Because we're not a live program, we don't have emails coming in right in front of us. But folks have been getting in touch, and that's been great. And we appreciate the things that you're saying about the Persecuted Church and what more you'd like. In fact, yesterday, I had a lady, well, I answered the phone in the office, and it happened to be a lady from Ireland. And when she knew it was me on the phone, she said, "Oh, Gordon," she said, "I was just writing you a letter about the Persecuted Church." And what she was saying basically was that it's great that they hear the news that they can pray. It's wonderful that they know the organisations so that they can give financially if they want to do. But what practically can they do to help? And she was saying, is there any kind of scheme that people can write letters to prisoners or write to governments or the like? Do you know of anything like that?
Well, I think there's lots that people can do practically to help. I mean, one thing, for example, is that whenever you give to an organisation such as Release International or Open Doors or others, there are lots of good organisations out there. They're working with partners on the ground who are providing that practical assistance. So that makes the whole of the world a village. We're all joined up together. You care in your heart, you provide financially, and that then goes directly to support people. But in terms of letter writing, there are a number of organisations that often around about Christmas time have a Christmas card writing program. Now, I don't know what's going to happen this year. We're midsummer, let's not talk about Christmas yet, but it's worth having a look at their websites because I know for a fact how helpful prisoners find it to have mail. Even if the mail never gets through to them, and often it does, but even if it doesn't, sometimes that can mean that the prison regimes realise the support that these prisoners are getting, and they back off a bit.
That's right. I can remember there have been one or two schemes where organisations have said, right, simply because it alerts the authorities that people in the West are concerned and bothered about this particular person in prison.
That's right. So I would say have a look at the websites of different organisations, find out if there is something you can get involved with, but don't feel frustrated that you can't reach out and touch people personally. When we put our arms around people in prayer, and sometimes I do pray like this, we just trust by faith that that's the arm of Christ reaching out to people. But providing financially means that they are getting practical support, such as legal aid, rehousing, safe houses in some cases. All kinds of practical help can be done with a cash you so kindly give.
If you're wanting to know more information, then encourage you. There's so many organisations out there which are helping and doing a vital work with the Persecuted Church. And not just Release International, but Andrew's with, but Open Doors, Christian Solidarity Worldwide, Voice of the Martyrs, Help the Persecuted, I'm sure, and many others as well. So look them up or ring the office and we're glad to give you information. So we love to hear from you, and if you send an email to info@revelationtv.com, then it'll come through to Andrew and I, and we'd love to see your comments. And the lady yesterday also said, she said, "I do love Andrew's preaching on Church Without Walls."
That's a lovely encouragement. Thank you so much.
All right. Well, hopefully by now you've received your Our Times. And if you have, then you'll have seen that I wrote a review about this particular book. It's called Brother, I Have Come to Arrest You, The True Story of Eritrea's Unlikely Christian Revolution, Dr. Bahani. And Andrew, you left me a copy with it last time. I've enjoyed, well, not just enjoyed, but I really felt privileged to read his story. It's an amazing story that he's written. But in my review in the Our Times, I put one quote, and it's the words written by Fiona Bruce, who's been an MP for Congleton in Cheshire for many years, and has been the vice chair of the all-party parliamentary group for the international freedom of belief and religion. And this is what she wrote. She said, "This book needs to be written and needs to be read. The world should know of the suffering and bravery of thousands of Eritreans barbarically imprisoned, tortured and killed simply on account of their beliefs," she says, "and to know that this is happening right now in the third decade of the 21st century." Andrew, you had a part to play in writing this book. Can you give us an update on Dr. Bahani?
Well, it was a privilege. I mean, Dr. Bahani he's a wonderful man. He's a very quiet man. The book describes him as an unlikely revolutionary. He's an unlikely hero too, because he's so self-effacing and so quiet. But God's done amazing things with his life. And the point of writing books like that is not just to expose a situation, but to show us that faith can not only survive in situations like that, but thrive. So for Dr. Bahani, as a kid, he was a gangly youth. He was bullied. He was never very well. And possibly he was quite fearful. But that all turned around when he was arrested. And the Lord just, in an instant, met him extraordinarily and supernaturally. He ended up being thrown into a prison cell on death row with other prisoners who were awaiting execution. And he shared the Lord with them, shared faith, and effectively became their spiritual minister to them in that cell. A man who could have got away on several occasions and yet chose not to. He chose not to escape because he felt the Lord had called him into that prison cell, into death row, in order to minister to the prisoners. But a more quiet, self-effacing hero of the faith you'd never find anywhere else. He does a great job. For his organisation is called Release Eritrea. That's a partner of Release International. But Dr. Bahani knows the prisoners of faith. He knows their families. He's in touch with those families. He provides comfort for them, and is also in regular touch with prisoners who have been released. He has his finger on the pulse of what's going on in Eritrea.
And he's in the UK now.
Yes, he's a doctor. He's based in London.
Okay. I mean, I just opened it at one point and it says, what would you do? This is a question for you. What would you do if you'd been thrown in prison for just being a Christian? If you were beaten, tortured and knew of others who'd been killed, simply for refusing to sign a piece of paper that would put an end to all your suffering and set them free, would you sign? But he remained in prison in order to serve them.
And he didn't sign.
I loved reading it. How do people get a hold of a copy if they want to?
I think from the Release International website. I had a quick look on Amazon, couldn't see it there yet. It's fresh out, but certainly you can get a copy of that on the Release International website.
All right. Well, we talked about Dr. Bahani last month on the Persecuted Church. In case you missed that program or you've forgotten what we said, here's just a taster of what we said.
Yeah, in Eritrea, some Christian groups were barred from gathering for worship in 2002. Since then, thousands of Christians been arrested, and they were put into shipping containers, and they suffered so much, and some also have lose their life. Still, many Christians are in prison. Some of them for 18 years. Our senior pastors were arrested in 2004, and they are still in prison. And since then, many people were getting arrested, and they are still in prison. We believe Jesus is Lord, and we cannot worship other gods. So that is the main thing. They persecute Christians from the beginning. So a lot of people who were arrested were caught from a wedding venue. I remember there was a couple who were renewing their wedding vows, and about 6 people were gathered. They were worshiping. They were also, of course, eating. Then the security or the police raided the house and arrested all of them. And the moment they arrested them, they asked them to renounce their faith.
What is your hope that this book will achieve?
It will inspire more people to speak against any form of injustice. Above all, also, we hope many people would pray. So they would pray for change in Eritrea, and also they would pray for those Christians who are suffering in Eritrean prisons, and particularly also their families are also suffering with them.
You know, the last confirmed arrests were in January when police raided a baby's first birthday party. Can you imagine that? That was in the capital, Asmara. They rounded up 30 adults along with children. They let those go who were not Christians, but they detained those who were Christians. I mean, what a thing to happen to you as you gather to celebrate your child's first birthday. And we also have unconfirmed reports, I have to say that unconfirmed, of other arrests made more recently.
Staggering, and to think that as we sit here in the comfort of our country, that people are still in containers, still in prisons, and have been for years and years and years.
Yeah, shocking.
Well, our main thrust today is going to be on China and on Hong Kong. But before we do that, we want to talk about one other country, and that's the country of Sudan. It is a sense in which this is not something that's about a persecuted church, it's just about the country of Sudan and what's happening there at the moment. Let's just put the map up on the screen of Sudan to remind you where Sudan is. It's there, it's Africa, it's that big dark blue spot, and it fills a lot of space in Sudan. And in Sudan, this was a report that came through about the war. It's not really being featured in the TV news at this moment of time, but there's a terrible destruction going on throughout the country. It's a country where the Sudanese army and another group called the Rapid Support Forces are basically fighting and killing each other, and the people who get in the way, they're just shot and they're killed and they're displaced. Andrew, can you tell us a little bit of the news of what's happening there?
Yeah, as much as it gets out, you know, there are credible reports that Darfur, which is a region there caught up in the conflict in Western Sudan, may be heading towards another genocide, and that's not an exaggeration. The situation is continuing to deteriorate to levels that are being described as catastrophic. The US is warning that Sudan is facing possibly the worst famine the world has ever seen since the one in Ethiopia, and I dare say we can remember that still. That happened in the 1980s. That famine killed 1 million people and is considered one of the worst humanitarian disasters of the 20th century.
It is. I've got some statistics for Sudan and just want to share them with you. According to the World Food Programme, nearly 18 million people are facing acute hunger in Sudan. You can't even begin to comprehend. Sudan, 18 million people. When I looked at that map before, I said to Andrew, Andrew, just across the way from Sudan is Saudi Arabia. And the contrast between the wealth and the poverty is staggering, just a stretch of water which separates them. 18 million people facing acute hunger in Sudan. For 5 million people, the lack of food has now reached emergency levels. And a food expert told the BBC he expected about 70% of the population to be in a state of extreme hunger by September. Here we are in July, we're just talking about 2 months away, and they're saying 70% of the country are going to be in extreme hunger. We are thankful that there's some Christian organisations that are working in Sudan and doing a tremendous job, and one such organisation is Samaritan's Purse. And here's a video that they've put out which talks about being the hands and feet of Jesus in Sudan.
When this bomb came, she was just in the house doing her own things and found herself already in the hospital. She did not find part of her leg.
They took me to the hospital. When I come back, the house is destroyed. And people run from one place to another. Even at that time, I don't know where is my husband.
We are currently here in Kordofan State, Sudan. The authorities are reporting that there are over 600,000 people who have moved to this place escaping the fighting. One of the biggest challenges in the camps right now is lack of food.
دايرين أكل كفاية ودايرين موية ودايرين نلبسوا ودايرين حاجات كتير هنا.
Patients here come with the medical complication due to malnutrition. You may be treating a disease, but still, if a patient didn't have anything to eat, it's still a challenge because the immune system will be low, and if there's no proper intervention, it will lead to death.
Samaritan Purse is responding by distributing food to some of these women and children who have been affected.
This season, we have corn, which is maize. We also have beans. We have salt and vegetable oil.
We are a strong community. We're not idle. We are breeding with this hay, and it's very tough. We have a lot of houses that caught fire. 2 children died in the fire because we don't have the building material.
Samaritan Purse has opened up mobile clinics in these camps, providing different kinds of health care. We're providing medicines to people who are sick and also doing hygiene promotion so that people understand why it's not good to do open defecations in the camps, because when the rains start, it's probably going to cause cholera as well.
Because if you continue with the open defecation, the flies are going to take the germs from your feces to your food.
Women and children come with acute water diarrhea, dehydration, a lot of vomiting. There was a lady with severe dehydration. After our intervention, giving the IV fluids, giving her drugs, in 2 days' time, we see her recovering. She told me, "Thank you, doctor. Had it not been you intervening, I would have died."
The needs are enormous and we are running out of time. When the rains start, most of these areas become inaccessible, but we believe that God is going to help us address all those needs.
To care, you have the empathy you feel for the suffering. You be in their shoes. This is what it means to help in Jesus' name.
You know, I've been to Sudan a number of times for quite a few different organizations. And I remember, Gordon, one particular time, I was so grateful to Samaritan's Purse. We were in a zone where there was already a famine. So to see that happening again is terrible. But Samaritan's Purse, there was a hospital there, and the government had sown it with mines. So nobody could go to the hospital. We couldn't get anywhere near it. There was a school to one side that they'd left, and Samaritan's Purse had turned that into a hospital. And there was one nurse there, they had virtually no supplies. Her name was Vicky Waraka, I remember her. And patients would come in and she would hug them and she would pray for them. And this place was clean and an oasis in the whole thing. So they do a remarkable job. But I remember also in Sudan, a little further, a little different direction, close to the capital Khartoum, lots of people have been displaced by conflict. Conflict has been going on there since 1955, frankly, with a few breaks. But these people have been displaced, and there's been a remarkable move of God in the southern half of that country where people are coming to Christ. So many of the displaced by war had gone up to this city called Omdurman, which is near Khartoum. And the Bible Society, I was there with Bible Society, were showing the Jesus film in this camp. No electricity in the camp at all. The only light was the flickering bulb from the projector, which was run off the car battery. And it was projected onto a sheet, which was hung over a washing line. There were thousands of people gathered to watch the Jesus film. And they got the reels in the wrong order, so we had the resurrection before the death. The projector broke down. You think, what a shambles! Yeah. But at the end of the film, when they said, "Would you like to give your lives to Jesus?" Yeah. The response was utterly astonishing. And I saw a graph showing the numbers that have been coming to Christ in Sudan, and it was an exponential increase. Really remarkable what God does in all of that situation. And yet, you know, this is not just a relief story that's going on there. This is about Christian persecution too, because today, as then in Sudan, people who convert to Christianity from a Muslim background, they declare themselves to be Christians, they risk their lives. Family members and others in the community, they can regard conversion as a betrayal, and they seek to kill them. And church leaders from Sudan have told a Christian broadcaster, a wonderful TV channel called Sat7, how despite the current conflict, the congregations there are persevering in their faith after a year of war, and they themselves are reaching out to help other people in need. Let me give you a couple of quotes. Rafat Samir of the Sudan Evangelical Alliance, he described how they'd turned church buildings into refuge centers for families fleeing the fighting. He said, "We didn't discriminate. We hosted non-Christians in our refuge centers. We provided them with food, and we helped the children through their trauma with trauma healing programs." And another man, Pastor Sami Rahal of the Evangelical Church, said despite the attacks and the destruction of church buildings, because many church buildings have been destroyed in this conflict, there is a religious element to it, but it's more than that. It's a conflict in which people bring in their religious concerns as well. He said, despite the destruction of buildings, the ministry is continuing. It's very sad for church buildings to be destroyed and attacked, he said, but the early church, they didn't have any buildings. The church is the believers, and the church is continuing. Our prayers are ongoing, and our evangelism services continue. Congregations are hosting other denominations to help them to pray in their buildings. So faith continues right on the front line.
That's right. And so when we hear about Sudan, we mustn't think of it as simply a Muslim country. It's actually got a thriving church and a growing church.
Absolutely. And Sudan is vast. You saw it on the map. Yeah. If you took that square of Sudan, stuck it onto Western Europe, it would swamp it. It's enormous. So you've got an Arab north, largely, a black African south, largely, and those black Africans particularly, there's a mixture of animism, but many of those animists, spirit worshippers really, and ancestor worshippers, they've become Christians. And when they've been driven by war to those refugee camps that I mentioned at the beginning, they would only give people food and water if they were Muslim.
That's right.
And yet, for many of them, that refusal to care for them was a real inoculation against Islam. We're not having that, they said. We're going to be Christians.
Living in Sudan is a real nightmare for the people with the war that's going on. I remember Lorna and I visited the country, and we had to be in Khartoum for ages trying to get our papers sorted out, and then we drove across country all the way to go and see a refugee camp in Eritrea. And you just saw the dead bodies of the animals on the sides of the road. And yet we met just outside Khartoum a group of people displaced, absolutely nothing, living in the little huts that you saw there. But they loved the Lord.
Yes, they do.
And served him.
Yeah.
And they had nothing. They literally just scraped the ground each day in order to survive. God's doing an amazing thing.
Yes.
But you're going to see a lot of Sudan on the news, I believe, in these next few months as this famine increases, how you need to keep praying for the people of Sudan. Well, we've talked about Eritrea, we've talked about Sudan. Now, the main thrust of our program today is the country of China. I was quite interested that I saw a report recently which said that India was now bigger than China. I think in terms of population, maybe it is, but China still has a huge influence in our world. And in particular today, we want to be talking about Hong Kong. Let's just go on a plane journey, shall we? When Andrew and I looked at that this morning, we said, now, where is Hong Kong? I wonder how many of you know exactly where Hong Kong is? Well, in a moment we'll put the map up a little bit closer. You're there in China. Whereabouts is Hong Kong? Let's have a look at the map, which is going to appear on the screen for us. There it is, right down at the bottom. You can see just across the way is Taiwan, the island that is causing such contention. Up there in the north, you've got North Korea and South Korea, and then this vast country of China and Hong Kong. Let's have a listen to the Persecuted Church for today, which is all about Hong Kong and China.
A new law could force Catholic priests in Hong Kong to reveal the secrets of the confessional. Partners of UK-based Release International say the British government has a responsibility to stand up for freedom of faith in its former colony. In the 35 years since China crushed the democracy movement in Tiananmen Square, the country has stepped up its persecution of Christians. Religious freedom in Hong Kong is now under growing threat. There are fears that new legislation could force Catholic priests to reveal the secrets of the confessional. Release International partner Bob Fu explains.
Potentially even the Catholic priest for up to 14 years imprisonment if they refuse to reveal the so-called crimes of sedition based on the believer's confession, a sacrament of repentance.
According to Bible Society, thousands of Hong Kong Christians have fled to the UK, establishing some 30 new churches. They say the Chinese church is now, by far, the fastest growing in Britain. Hong Kong became a British colony in 1842 and was ceded back to China in 1997. Bob Fu, a former Tiananmen protester, believes the British government has a moral obligation to protect religious freedom in its former colony.
The Hong Kongers are really expecting the UK to continue to stand strong for the religious freedom in Hong Kong, and to speak up for them, and also to take all necessary measures possible to protect those who flee out of the persecution.
A new report by the US Commission on International Religious Freedom says the crackdown on house churches continues. The report says Christians held in secret detention centres and prisons have been tortured. Release International is calling on the world to wake up and recognise the severity of the persecution in China that is now reaching out to Hong Kong.
Well, we say thank you to Andrew for preparing that report for us on Hong Kong. I guess it's inevitable that when a country like Hong Kong goes back into the fold of China, that it'll take on the ways of China. Those of us who are old enough, people like me and you maybe, can remember 1997 and Margaret Thatcher, and Chris Patten was the Governor General of Hong Kong at that time, and the negotiations that took place. I think some people today will wonder, well, why when it was British did we hand it back? But that was because we had to by treaty, didn't we?
We had to by treaty, and you know, if you go back to how we got that country in the first place, it wasn't exactly honourable. It was to do with opium wars. So, frankly, there's no surprise we had to hand it back. And it's also no surprise that having reverted back to China, the persecution that we see happening in droves in China on the mainland is actually now spreading to Hong Kong, especially, you know, as the eyes of the world are so fixed upon events in Ukraine and Gaza right now. You know, last June was the 35th anniversary of the Tiananmen Square massacre. That was when the tanks, we saw a bit of that in the report, the tanks rolled into Tiananmen Square to crush the democracy movement and to crush the hopes of freedom there for many people. Now that was commemorated around the world, but not, of course, in China. And in the past, the Tiananmen massacre was also commemorated in Hong Kong. It's said that up to 180,000 people would hold candles and state a vigil in Hong Kong's Victoria Park. Now that's not been able to go on. In fact, the situation has changed to such a degree that even to light a candle anywhere near that park this year was judged to be a criminal offence.
It's staggering. Well, Release International's partner Bob Fu, who featured in Andrew's report there, he was in Tiananmen Square at the time, and he's now been granted asylum in the United States, where he's begun his own ministry entitled China Aid. And Andrew had the opportunity of talking with him, and we thought you'd want to see the conversation that took place between them.
Has the clampdown in Christianity that we see happening on mainland China, has that now reached Hong Kong?
The religious freedom situation in Hong Kong certainly has been under increasing threat. We even have seen a Christian pastor was sentenced to 13 months for being accused of preaching seditious messages, according to the newly imposed the Hong Kong national security law. The Secretary of Justice, Paul Lam, proposed new legislation to punish potentially even the Catholic priest for up to 14 years imprisonment if they refuse to reveal the so-called crimes of sedition, endangering national security, based on the believer's confession.
It's 35 years now since the Tiananmen Square massacre, where China sent in tanks and troops against democracy protesters and students. I know that you were involved in that movement, Bob. Think back over those 35 years. How much has changed for Christians since then?
Mainland China, you have thousands of churches being demolished, and crosses were being burned and destroyed. And in recent years, of course, under the name of financial fraud, and they criminalized the tithing and offering. Even in recent few weeks, we have seen churches from Anhui province to Guangdong province, Sichuan province, Shandong province, Inner Mongolia. I mean, we have seen brothers and sisters were being just incarcerated, arrested, raided, simply organizing independent house churches. So the persecution against the Chinese church has reached the worst level we have not seen since the Tiananmen Square has happened.
Bible Society in the UK published a report not that long ago which said that many Christians are leaving Hong Kong. In fact, many of them are coming to the UK, and according to Bible Society, it's now the fastest growing church in the UK, Chinese Christians from Hong Kong. Is that your experience? Do you find that many are leaving?
So many chose to be exiled and leave. Of course, their first destination is in the United Kingdom.
Hong Kong used to be a British protectorate, so what would be your message to the UK government about the situation facing Christians in Hong Kong?
The United Kingdom has both the international legal and certainly a moral imperative and obligation, I think, to speak up, to stand up, and to protect, Hong Kong's freedom, especially freedom of religion.
What do Hong Kong Christians want us to pray for them?
I think the number one prayer from Christians in Hong Kong is perseverance and courage and boldness despite of the threats, because biblical promise in Romans chapter 8 is nothing, not persecution, not even death, not even isolation, nor angels, nor a political party, certainly Communist Party or government can separate the love of Christ from them. So I'm still, politically, it's very, very pessimistic mood, and but spiritually, we know who is the sovereign Lord, and that is the resurrected Lord Jesus Christ. and he is still alive. He's still causing and leading the revival. The fact they are facing the most severe persecution among even house churches, yet the spirit of revival continues.
Bob Fu, thank you so much.
Well, you'll rarely see on secular television an interview like that, hearing about what really is happening in China, because China sees the church as a threat. And I guess when we think about things spiritually, it is a threat, isn't it?
Yes, I mean, if you think back to the piece we did earlier on Eritrea, what Dr. Bahani said there was that as Christians, we worship the living God. But where you have an atheist, authoritarian country, a state, they require full control over everybody, which is actually a form of worship. So in the end, the contention is for who do you worship? And Christians in the end will have to say our first allegiance is to God, which in a totalitarian society, an authoritarian society, they actually, at some fundamental level, want the worship.
Yeah. There's one very interesting thing in your interview, I thought, where you talked about how the Chinese from Hong Kong are coming over to this country. And I thought as I listened to that, we used to be a sending country where we sent missionaries out into China and India and Africa and elsewhere. Now, the Lord is arranging for Christians to come into this country. And maybe they're going to be the means that we're going to see a spark of revival break out in our own country.
The whole world is coming to the UK, and of course that was one of the hugely contentious issues when it came to the election. But I think there's something of God in all of this. And if you look at that extraordinary report from Bible Society that Chinese from Hong Kong have now made this, they say, Britain's fastest growing church. And though they are going to be in such a good position to reach out to other Chinese in this country, but also beyond that to others as well. And that's happening again and again in this country.
So don't despair, and pray that these Christians who are coming from other countries to our country, that they'll continue to evangelize and to reach out, and we'll see great things happening in our country again. Well, we're covering lots of different countries today. We've talked about Eritrea, we've talked about Sudan, we've talked about Hong Kong. But we also want to keep reminding you, we don't simply want to do a country and then move on. Last month, we talked a lot about Pakistan and the struggle and the suffering that Christians are experiencing there. And we particularly talked about a cobbler who was accused of blasphemy. And because of that, he was badly beaten. And news has come through over the last month that sadly he's died. So Andrew, can you give us an update?
Yes, it's a sad story. His name was Nazir Gill, and he was a Christian shoemaker. He ran a shoemaking factory in a place called Sargodha, which is in Punjab in Pakistan. And like so many others, and this is happening increasingly, we can't begin to report all of the cases, he was accused of blasphemy. He was accused of burning the Islamic holy book, the Quran, with other papers on a bonfire. Now, this update on that story gives a real flavor of what it's like to be a Christian in Pakistan in 2024. And while we spare you the worst, the details of this are disturbing. A cry went up from mosque loudspeakers that Nazir had burned the Quran, and a mob descended on Sargodha, beat him almost to death, looted his factory, and set fire to his property. They filmed it all and posted it all on social media, including graphic video of the mob brutally attacking the elderly shoemaker with stones, bricks, and sticks. It wouldn't be right to show that. The same mob stoned the police when they tried to intervene. Nazir, who was 74, was taken to hospital where he was in a critical condition. The mob pelted the ambulance with rocks as it took him away. Doctors tried their utmost to remove fragments of bone from his brain, but unsurprisingly, Nazir later died from his injuries at the hands of the mob. He went to be with the Lord 9 days later on June the 3rd. His son, Sultan Gill, said the riot started at 6 a.m. when up to 30 Muslims gathered outside their gates. He told Morning Star News, "I sought forgiveness on my father's behalf if he had indeed mistakenly done something wrong, but they refused to listen." Police had to take the family to a place of safety to prevent further loss of life. That growing mob looted all their possessions and left the family in a state of deep shock and fear. Nazir's widow, who's in her 70s, was so traumatized she was unable to speak. Nazir's son Sultan believed the attack was motivated not by blasphemy, but by jealousy. Nazir's business was flourishing, and there were many attempts to close them down. "This time," said Sultan, "they misused religion to persecute us." The president of the Church of Pakistan, Bishop Azad Marshall, asked the question everybody wants an answer to. Where will this stop? We have come too far. And the Human Rights Commission of Pakistan is absolutely scathing about that incident. They describe it as a calculated assault manipulated through religious fervour. And I have to say, I've seen it again and again, and I've seen it since even recording that. Somebody now in Pakistan is accused of blasphemy for treading on the pages of Quran strewn across the street. These things, it seems, are being done deliberately in order to provoke people. So what happened in this case is that what began as a dispute between neighbours led to a cry of blasphemy literally through the mosque loudspeakers. That stirred up a 2,000-strong mob, and that led to murder on the streets of Pakistan. How many times have we seen that before? You know, Release International and others have long been campaigning for the repeal of these notorious blasphemy laws in this country. These laws are used and abused in order to justify violence and to take out rivals. Just the mere accusation is enough to end your life. A disproportionate number of those attacked are Christians. These laws must be repealed.
It's staggering, isn't it, what's going on in Pakistan. Just remind us, what does the blasphemy law say?
Well, there are various elements of it, but if you were to say something against Muhammad, that would be a blasphemy. If you were to desecrate the Quran, that's considered to be a blasphemy, and at its most severe, that will give you a death penalty. But what that actually means in practice is that just to make the accusation leads to this hue and cry on the mosque loudspeakers, leads to mobs beginning to gather who are determined to take the law into their own hands. If it goes to court, then it'll go to a local court. Those local courts are packed out by Islamist militants who are baying for blood. The judges are intimidated and they make a guilty plea. It then goes to appeal. There's several stages of appeal. It's no longer local. At that point, people can be acquitted. It can be found that there's no case to answer, but I've covered cases where people who have been acquitted of blasphemy, no case to answer, have gone outside the court as free people to be gunned down in the streets. There are people like Asya Bibi who end up on death row in Pakistan. So Release International has launched an appeal to help Christians facing violence and oppression, and that includes those in Pakistan.
Avadan still remembers the terrible ordeal of being falsely accused of abducting his children after his Muslim wife left him. And even today his life remains difficult and dangerous. He must keep a very low profile and tries to live out of sight of his neighbours. Avadan is just one example of many. We spoke to Sonia, our partner in Pakistan, about what life is like for Christians in her country.
Incidents are really threatening Christians. Like where is our identity and how we are gonna survive in this country. Any other quarrel or any disagreement, they can falsely misuse the law of blasphemy. If you will hear from the government people or any police officers, they will say that we are giving our best protection to the Christians or the minority. But on the other hand, some Muslim parties, they have influenced the young boys and young people of Muslim community. With the snap of finger, they can they are very aggressive to fight for their Islam. And that it is really kind of scaring us that how we are gonna, or our children gonna survive in such a suffocated community. Like, if they don't like you, they can just manipulate the things and make your life terrible. And this is, our first, you can say, concern to pray for the Christian community in Pakistan. Even we are grateful that through our work, through our team members, we are reaching them. But still there are more, and we need to reach them and, show the love and care of Jesus, to bring the love of God to them.
I was just listening to that and thinking of those words at the end of the Beatitudes in Matthew chapter 5, where it says, "Blessed are the peacemakers, for they shall be called sons of God." Blessed are those, listen to this, blessed are those who are persecuted for righteousness' sake, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are you when they revile and persecute you and say all kinds of evil against you falsely for my sake. Rejoice and be exceedingly glad, for great is your reward in heaven. I'm not sure if I was facing a mob like that of 2,000 people and they were beating and kicking, that I'd be feeling like rejoicing. But that's what the scriptures say. They have their promise in heaven.
They do, and thank God for that. But I think the only way that you can, the word blessed means be happy. Really? Be happy when you're being stoned? How can that be? It defies common sense, but I think the only way through all of that is actually, as the words of that old song go, turn your eyes upon Jesus. Look full in his wonderful face, and the things of this earth will grow strangely dim in the light of his glory and grace. That's all we can do. We guard our hearts, we keep our eyes on our hearts, turn to the Lord. And that's what we need to pray for. As Dr. Bahani was saying earlier, pray for the church in Eritrea also, that they have courage. How can we have courage? Only by turning our eyes firmly and our hearts firmly onto the Lord.
Well, we've been doing a quick tour around the world today, and hopefully you've been writing down the countries, and we'll continue to pray for them. Our final stop is at the country of Turkey. I would think most people, if you talk to them in the United Kingdom, would say Turkey, it's a holiday destination. In fact, we have a man who comes in and helps us with the repairs in our studio, and he's just been on holiday. And when he came back, I said to him, "Oh, where have you been to for your holiday?" He said, "Oh, I went to Turkey and had a marvelous time." Well, it was Howard who alerted me to, because he said, an email's just come in, and he said, we're going as a Revelation tour on the 7 churches of Asia Minor, and Asia Minor is Turkey. And he said, in view of this email, are we all right? Are we going to be safe? Well, the email that came in to us said, Turkey's highest court rules in support of government expulsion of 9 foreign Christians for alleged missionary activity. The highest court in Turkey has issued a decision supporting the government on cases banning foreign Christian workers from the country. Well, we were able to assure Howard that our viewers who are going on the tour of the 7 churches are going to be totally safe. But it did alert, certainly to me, that I've never really thought of Turkey, Andrew, as a country which has got Christian persecution. What can you tell us?
Yeah, the background to this is one that we see rising all over the place. It's religious nationalism. It's that sense that to be Turkish is to be a Muslim. We see the same kind of thing in India with Hinduism. We see it in Pakistan. We see it in Iran. And what's happening there is that foreign Christians are being forced to leave the country or are banned from returning, including those with Turkish husbands, wives and children, which of course is devastating for the family. So this combination of rising religious nationalism and a growing emphasis on Islamic values by the government, that's intensifying the pressure on believers in Turkey. So anyone who converts to Christianity in there is seen as being disloyal to their country and their community, and they then come under pressure to give up this imposter faith that they've taken on. So many foreign Christians, oddly enough, you know, despite what's happening in Turkey, many foreign Christians have fled there to escape persecution in their own country, and that includes people from Iran. But even they can come under pressure to return to Islam.
Well, here's one of the workers who's been put out of Turkey. He works for Operation Mobilization, and this is him telling his story.
Christians have been living in Turkey ever since the time of Christ, and yet now in these current times there's an increasing number of Christians who are being forced to leave. My name is David Bile, and I am an evangelist who loves telling people about Jesus, especially Turkish speakers. It's so exciting what we've experienced in Jesus that it's something I don't want to just whisper. I want to shout this to people. We felt God was calling us to very openly and publicly proclaim the good news of Jesus. So when we went out in the streets and started preaching, we would always get crowds of people who would stop and listen. The government had been trying to get rid of us for many years. We lived in Turkey for 19 years. All the rest of our kids, we have 5 kids. 4 of them were born either in Turkey or during our time in Turkey. So Turkey is home for them. Now I'm banned from entering the country. I mean, I was taken to police stations dozens of times through the years in Turkey. I was held overnight in Turkey, I think about 4 or 5 times, and for multiple days. When I had to leave Turkey in 2018, they made it sound like I could just come back as soon as I left the country. So it was a big blow to arrive in the airport in Istanbul. And when the policeman, you know, looked across the desk from me and said, "You have a permanent entry ban," I thought, oh, so this is it. And it was hard because I knew I hadn't seen my family for a month, and they all were just a couple hundred meters away on the other side of the door waiting for me, and it wasn't going to happen. We know for a fact that there are dozens and dozens of other Christians and Christian workers in Turkey who have faced a similar fate as ours.
David's case is about the freedom to express one's faith and to share it in the public square. David's missionary work is legal under both the European Convention on Human Rights and Turkish national law. It is a serious violation to use immigration laws as a pretext to interfere with a person's fundamental right to manifest their religious beliefs.
The authorities made several attempts to try and stop us from spreading the gospel. Jesus said, "Go and make disciples of all nations." But how can we do that if people are always shutting the borders on us?
Christians are the most persecuted religious group in the world. Yet that issue receives such limited attention from the international community. And so one of the reasons that we are taking David's case to the European Court of Human Rights is to bring about systematic change. Because David's not alone. Since 2019, more than 60 other foreign nationals have been forced to leave Turkey in similar circumstances. And our hope is that the court will hand down a judgment that upholds not just David's rights, but the rights of everyone to live in accordance with what they believe and to share those beliefs with others.
There certainly are people in the government who may not like us being in Turkey, but we know for sure there's a lot of people who would love to have us there. We hope that someday God will open the doors again so that we can go back to Turkey and keep spreading this amazing news about Jesus.
Well, we've only touched the surface today of situations that are happening around our world at this moment of time. And we could just go on and look at country after country, but we've given you hopefully a taster of what's happening and how Christians in different parts of the world are responding to the persecution that they're facing. Andrew, it's a privilege to do what we're doing, isn't it?
Oh, enormously, Gordon, absolutely. And when you meet these folks, you see the faith, you see the hope, you see the love, despite everything. You know, the sense that I have is sometimes it's a bit like going through a wine press. We seek the face of God, we hope we find his heart, but sometimes we have to have his feet. And his feet are pressing out the wine and producing the best possible wine. So we can always have hope.
Amen. Well, we have hope, and we can pray, and we can stand with our brothers and sisters in Christ. Thank you so much for being with us today. Thank you, Andrew. God bless you. Bye-bye.